Good evening. I'm Angelique Power, Chairman of the Board of Chicago State Foundation. It's my sincere pleasure to welcome you to tonight's virtual panel discussions, America's Original Sin, Where Do We Go From Here? Rooted in its intentional commitment to serve as the kitchen table around which our community convenes for important, sometimes painful, but absolutely necessary conversations, Chicago State Foundation is honored to present tonight's two-part series. Part 1, Corporate Engagement and Philanthropy, and Part 2, Education, Equity, and Social Activism. Each panel features absolutely incredible leaders who have been in the arena working in real time to move the needle on race in America. So let's get right to it. I'm thrilled to introduce the moderator for Part 1 of our discussion, our amazing executive director and my friend, Mr. Darice Brown. Darice has more than 25 years of demonstrable experience in strategic fund management, marketing and communications, and events management. As executive director of the Chicago State Foundation, Darice is responsible for advancing the interest and welfare of Chicago State University through partnership development, stewardship of university assets, and identification and solicitation of financial support from individuals, corporations, and foundations. Previously, for the Chicago Urban League. In that role, Darice oversaw fund development, created outcomes-driven programs, and designed and implemented cross-functional initiatives, including the Urban League's Race and Equity Initiative and Centennial Campaign. A Detroit native, Darice is a graduate of the University of Michigan and is the Essence best-selling author of the novels Five Dimes and Divalicious and the anthology Mad Love. Without further ado, let me turn this over to Darice.
Oh, what a fantastic introduction, Chair David. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for your leadership. In times like these, I've said it once, if I've said it 100 times, leadership truly matters. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, making time with us in this topsy-turvy world that changes every day. That you make the time to be here means more to us. Our commitment is not to waste that time, and I think we have curated an incredible group of leaders who have been in the arena to help have this conversation. This isn't going to be the first or the last conversation on the topic, but we want to just make sure that we're bringing something to the table and doing our part to continue what is probably the most important period in our history. Let's jump right into it. Let me introduce to you these incredible panelists on panel 1. Karen Dumas is a communications professional and media contributor committed to excellence, entrepreneurship, and equality. As the founder of Images and Ideas, she has earned a reputation as a communication strategist known for performance and excellence. Karen also served as Chief of Communication and External Affairs for Mayor Dave Bing and the city of Detroit, my hometown. Karen is a regular contributor to the No BS News Hour with Charlie LaDuff. If you haven't listened, you should. And a popular political and news, panel show, Let It Rip, on the Fox O&O in Detroit. Respected as a trusted and fair radio host, television contributor, and columnist, Karen is known for being honest and engaging and has been recognized by Our magazine as, quote, the more intelligent choice of talk radio shows. Welcome, Darice Brown. Darice is the Senior Director, Diversity Recruiting Programs and Partnerships for ServiceNow. In this role, Darice engages globally across the organization to support talent attraction, engagement, and pipeline development. Before joining ServiceNow, Darice worked for Rockwell Automation in their corporate affairs and operations organizations. Darice has spent most of her career leading crisis communications, global reputation management, executive public relations, and media influencer campaigns. Corliss Garner. Corliss V. Garner is the Senior Vice President and Head of Corporate Social Responsibility, Diversity, Inclusion at First Midwest Bank. In this role, Corliss is responsible for designing and executing strategies in diversity, inclusion, and corporate citizenship that drive the bank's business and growth. She also serves on the board of the First Midwest Bank Foundation. Prior to joining First Midwest, Corliss had leadership positions at BMO Harris Financial Corp in the areas of operations, wealth management, commercial lending, philanthropy, and diversity and inclusion. In 2013, in honor of her late mother, Corliss created the Murray L. Garner Scholarship Fund, supporting college aspirations for African-American girls from the west side of Chicago. Tiffany Hamel Johnson. Tiffany is the president and chief executive director officer of Chicago United, a corporate membership organization that aims to achieve parity and economic opportunity for people of color in the Chicago area. Tiffany leads its mission to advance multiracial leadership in corporate governance, executive management, and business partnerships, thereby transforming the Chicago region into the nation's most inclusive business ecosystem. Prior to taking the helm of Chicago United in April of 2020, just this year, Tiffany was the executive vice president of the strategy and administration for Rural Business Chicago. Previously, Tiffany served as an assistant and deputy chief neighborhood development officer in former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel's administration. Jerell Parker. Jerell currently serves as senior vice president, Midwest regional manager for CBS Global Distribution. With 14 plus years of experience, all with King World CBS, Jerell is responsible for distributing, marketing, and negotiating licenses, fees, and local broadcast companies for the rights to air the lineup of shows that include, but not limited to, you'll know these names, Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, Dr. Phil, Judge Judy, and Entertainment Tonight. Jerell was born and raised on the south side of Chicago and is a member of the 5th and most recent cohort of the Chicago Urban League Impact Leadership Development Program. He's also the director of the Small Ball for First Step Youth Foundation. The mission of First Step is to prepare young student athletes for all of the challenges and opportunities that come with playing high school and collegiate level sports. And last but absolutely not least, Angelique Power. Angelique, as president of the Phil Foundation, she designed a journey with her staff, board, and nonprofit partners to center racial justice in the foundation's work. Over the past 4 years, Phil Foundation has changed how it funds, who it funds, has created accountability structures for the community to review its work, rethought its metrics, created heat maps that illustrate the design of inequity within Chicago, and has updated its investment policies. Angelique chairs the board, additionally, she chairs the board of 6018 North and Enrich Chicago, an organization she co-founded, which is dedicated to racial equity in the arts. She also serves on the board of Forefront Illinois and the advisory committee of the Illinois Justice Project. That is a panel. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
How are we feeling?
Hi,
Let's get it. Hi, listen, we got a lot going on, so let's just jump into it. I usually would have begun right now with kind of the abstract of this event, but I was preparing for this and I read an editorial in the Detroit News. And I said, and it's an editorial written by one of the panelists, so let's play that game, who wrote it? But it kind of sets the tone for us. So I'll just read the excerpt and then I'll ask my first question. Here we go. The growing and seemingly never-ending list of Black people killed as a result of deep-seated hatred, fear, and discrimination that is embedded in the fabric of this country has hit another boiling point. The cycle has become all too familiar. An unjustified killing of a Black person, followed by a protest, a plea, a call for policy change, and police reform. Black people are understandably fed up with a country and system that has generationally misled, disrespected, disregarded, excluded, and unjustifiably incarcerated and killed them. White people must own up to a legacy of discrimination sustained by a structure that continues to disproportionately benefit them. They must respect Black people enough to recognize that regardless of their level of sympathy, promoted compassion, and cultural appropriation, they will never know what it's like to be Black in America. They must ask the hard questions and be ready for candid and painful answers. Race has been an unspoken evil whose head continues to be raised. Either we talk about it and be about the business of changing who we are and how we act, or risk becoming all consumed as a result. And my absolute favorite part of this editorial, the author ends with, and please don't come at me with accusations of race baiting. This isn't playing the race card, it's a reality check. Karen Dumas.
Yes.
As always, you have a reputation for saying it like you mean it. So I'll begin building on this. First question to you. Do you honestly believe that America has the fortitude and fearlessness to finally deal with and address head-on the issue of systemic racism and anti-blackness in a measurable and meaningful way?
No, I don't,
Okay.
because it undermines the very thing that has established and continues to sustain this country, and that's economics. I mean, Black people built this country. I mean, and I know it's a joke, but everybody, you know, on social media had all these pictures of people with their stimulus checks, you know, standing outside of Gucci. And for whatever reason, we continue to fuel this country. If in fact America were to really come to terms with who it is and what it's done to Black America, it would undermine their status quo. It would undermine the comfort level of who they are and what they're able to do. If you've ever read Ellis Coast's, and now I can't think of the name of the book, and I've sent you one, Darius, but America, white America is threatened by the strength of the Black male, of Black excellence, of Black intellect. I mean, that's a reality. That's not saying, you know, everybody else is terrible, but, you know, we rate pretty high. But the way that you keep us out of that circle is by systemically creating or preventing us from taking advantage of opportunities. And we can't legislate or legalize our way out of it. I mean, if you have a rule book in a corporation or an organization, certainly it's against our rules to discriminate. But I can find a reason why I don't advance you to the next level in an interviewing process, or not involve you in a conversation, or not listen to or take seriously your recommendations. So to answer your question, honestly, Darius, no, America's not. We're doing this, it's election time. Everything that we see now is a duplication of what took place back with the Black Panthers. You know, they had all these young white kids that were protesting, and everybody thought something was going to be different that time because it was the introduction of television. Now we expect something to be different because now we have the presence of social media. Yeah, what it does is that it offers a microscope into, you know, what's going on. But the reality is that no, the only person that can really change this, if we really wanted to, would be us, and we'd have to do it collectively.
Okay. Corliss Garner, thank you, Karen. And Karen, the book you're referring to is The Envy of the World. Thank you, Roderick Hawkins, for sending in notes.
And I send it to everybody.
There's a village you have sent it. Thank you, Roderick. Corliss, what say you to the same question?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And so delighted to be here. I think we live in two Americas, right? So if we look at the America of those who have been marginalized, I think those folks are definitely ready, willing, able. They have been mobilizing. They've been demonstrating that fortitude and that fearlessness. But there's another slice of America that has benefited from this marginalization, right? And I think those folks fall on a spectrum. You have the people who harken back to the America of 1950, when it was really great for them, but not so much for the marginalized. And then you have the folks who are at the other end of the spectrum, down the street from my house, protesting in the park with Black Lives Matter written all over their chests, right? So you have that spectrum of folks. What does that mean for, can America move itself forward? Until we are not divided, I really don't know the answer to that question. We are truly operating in two countries, and it means very different things for different people in this country.
Darice Brown, I'm going to throw this at you before we move on to the last question. What say you?
I fall in between Karen and Corliss. I want to believe that we're going to change. I want to believe that there is a majority of people who are painfully coming to the realization of what we all know. We live in two Americas. We built this country. We have very, 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 very few of us have benefited the way that we should have. And I want to also believe that because it is so globally out there, we need to be forced to change because we moved into a global economy. And as a global economy, we now have customers everywhere. We have people everywhere. But we have to come together. We have to find that village, that family mentality that we once had, that was in essence kind of ripped from us, and we just have never been able to come back. We have to find that because we are the ones that will make that change. We demonstrate our power every day. We demonstrate our knowledge, we demonstrate our fortitude every day, as we have since we were brought to this country. And we just have to figure out how to come together and push forward and push for the change we want to see.
Got it. Let me thank you, Darcy. Let's talk about, I believe it was in Corliss's answer of the coming together. Since the murder, because that was a delineating line for me, since the videotaped murder of George Floyd, and Jerell, I'm going to start with you because you and I have talked about this. What have your conversations been? How have you broached, or your white colleagues broached, the subject of America's rooted to the core problem with race? Talk to me, Jerell, what has that been, and how have you processed it, managed it? What has been your appetite for it in the days and weeks since Mr. Floyd's murder?
Well, when it first happened, you know, as a Black man, right, which I feel like, and I think someone mentioned it right in the beginning, is probably the most targeted group in this country, right? It's the one group that no one really wants to get behind. And again, I love my Black women. I think what you ladies have done and are doing is really amazing, right? But I think for America to get behind the Black man is just one thing that they have fought for, or we have fought for a long time. So when I saw George Floyd, and I have 2 sons, right? And when I saw the video for the first time, the first thing I thought was, I'm not going to show this to my son, right? I'm not going to subject him to even watching this, to grow up with that kind of mentality, because to me it was a statement kind of a deal. To hold your knee on a man's neck for that long, there's an intention there. But what it also did for me internally, corporately, with my conversations with a lot of people that I talked to, was it literally ripped the gloves off. We're done with this, right? We are absolutely done sugarcoating, making everyone else in the room comfortable. My goal when this came about was to make everyone in the room uncomfortable. I wanted it cringeworthy. I really did, right? Because enough's enough at that point. Given what I do for a living and traveling and dealing with broadcast TV stations all over the country, you know, during the Colin Kaepernick fiasco, whatever you want to call it, right? There was some obvious prudence to what he was doing. But during that, and dealing with Fox TV stations a lot of times, and a lot of different television stations, especially those that broadcast the NFL, I'd hear a lot of times, oh, I wish they would get the politics out of football. Right? And at the time, I know now I was a little hesitant in what my response probably should have been at the time. But again, you asked me about what happened after I saw that video, and once George Floyd happened, the gloves were off, right? It's over with now. And I made sure I gave that disclaimer to everyone that asked me that question going forward, right? What do you think? How should we feel? Because I think that, like a lot of white people, especially white males, wanted to come to you with their feelings, because they did. You know, there is a group of people within that entire universe that, whether they're ready, going back to your first question or not, I think the mirror was held up. If not to them, to who their father was, right? So whether they're ready or not, I think they were ready to acknowledge what is. And it's up to us to kind of tie what these 3 ladies said prior to me. It's up to us to kind of move that needle now, because I think there is a sense to part of the population that's ready to at least acknowledge it. No one's going to willingly give up power. That's not going to happen. You can look across the history of the world. that's not going to happen, right? But once they acknowledge, it's up to us to kind of move that needle next. And I think that's what George Floyd did for me, was the gloves came completely off him.
Got it. Thank you. Tiffany, you took over a venerable organization during COVID, during this time of civil unrest, and your organization is one that is about creating the inclusivity in these spaces. So I'm going to ask you the same question, because it's pretty much a lot of what you do. You probably have no choice but to broach the conversation with the folks you're working with. So what has that been like, both professionally in the role of the work that Chicago United has, from its core, was designed to do from its inception, but what does that mean for you as the mother of a Black son, the wife of a Black man, the daughter of a Black man, the sister of a Black woman? Let's not ever forget Breonna Taylor and our other sisters, Sandra Bland, and the list unfortunately goes on. So talk about how you manage and broach those conversations, because we constantly have to peacefully coexist. You're both a CEO, a new one, in a really white-leaning organization, and you're all these other things. How did that feel? What did that look like?
Yes, I've been on the job, going into 4 months. And so coming in, I think the office was, COVID, they were home for like a month before I came in, mid-April, right? And then George Floyd happens. And during that time, I'm trying to just, you have the board, you're trying to build relationship with the board. But what I could do at that point after his murder was just have my truth, be as transparent, what I wake up with every day. I am who I am, personally and professionally. This is why you hired me. So for me, it was, I needed people to understand, it's kind of what Jerell was saying. Here's the Band-Aid's off, okay? The Band-Aid's off, and here's what's happening. And so we did professionally have a lot of board members and member companies coming to us, even though they're, members, right? To talk about kind of what was happening within their, culture, and their Black employees were heartbroken, right? And so we were having these emotional conversations with the CEOs, with their CDOs. We'd have these, small groups with the diversity officers and hiring managers. We kind of just would just curate these smaller groups so people can just talk about how they led through the pandemic globally, the global pandemic, and I call a racial pandemic. And there's uncomfortability, right? And so for me, it was the acknowledgement that this is what happened, that a Black man was murdered. And the first step off is people had to acknowledge it, if that makes sense, right? So we had those conversations. I would have conversations with the new staff that I came in, and I am a Black woman. I went overboard. I just went there. And Black woman, where I live, my son's in private school. I live in Lakeview. My husband's in commercial real estate. I went this whole list for them. And if I couldn't walk out of my house, and I said this to everybody, the board, everybody, we could not walk out of our house that weekend because someone who may not know us that weekend, that there was just people were coming from all over. If they said something crazy to me, someone would have been jacked up, right? Which I am so not, but Darius, but that is where I was at that moment. All of us. My Black son, who's in a private school, was heartbroken. So for me, Jerell, like you said, gloves are off. Gloves are off. And there is an acknowledgement that people have to have. And the board the board that hired me understood the piece around the Chicago United and taking it to another level, right? So people will say this is an opportune time for Chicago United. It's around race and business. And the people that have committed to our organization are committed. And that's a great first step. And they have done the work and they're willing to. But what I have understood in this space too is we have to meet our corporate members where they are too, because people still have a lot of work to do. So for me, it was just being as, hopefully I answered you, it was being as transparent as I possibly could and telling people, honestly, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable because there is no magic bullet right now. I can't give you an answer. If you're asking me what we should do, I can't give you an answer. about how we settle this right now, because this took how many hundreds of years to get to it? And these are not stories that we just are hearing. So that's the other thing I had to say to everybody. Y'all aren't just hearing this for the first time, okay? And we had CEOs of our member companies that said our Black colleagues are tired of telling us these stories. I can name stories we have. What we've heard before, that this isn't new, you know, maybe because of the pandemic and we have a perfect storm and people didn't have sports and people lost jobs and all this other stuff, and everything was ripped off and people had to pay attention.
And you know what's interesting, and I'm about to, I knew I was going to enjoy having this conversation. Right after George Floyd's murder, I was having a professional call with someone on this panel, the leader of Field Foundation. And we were waiting for the president of the university to join us. And we were trying to be professional. And then I said something, and Angelique said something, and I said something before, by the time the president got on, we were like, and this is it. And what we're not gonna do, and what I'm not gonna feel today, and I'm done. And then I was saying things to Angelique like, at 52, I'm having these feelings of guilt and waves of grief because how many times did I walk in the room making them feel comfortable, speaking the King's English, being okay when they say to me, oh, he's so articulate. Being okay very early, being the only one in the room. That's not acceptable. And then Angelique, we were talking again, and Angelique said, you know what's happening? We have to sit with it. The pandemic, we can't run from ourselves. We can't run from ourselves. We can't run from what's happening. We're sitting with it. And here's what, and I think Karen may have talked about this, action versus words. Someone on the panel, I love this game. Someone on the panel said this at the Americans for the Arts event. She said, and I quote, equity is action. It's accountability. It's showing receipts. And then she went on to say, as she stared directly in the camera, mark my words and mark them good. When we reopen, every place will be our home. We will know each other not by our words, but by our actions. We will see the electricity of new power lines being laid. We will track each cent and hold, this is my favorite part, we will track each cent and hold every equity statement making organization accountable. Angelique Power, talk to us about the conversation you led was called the death of equity. And I think sometimes, and we've got some DEI leaders on here, there is a conflation of those terms. And here's my question, specific. Companies have spouted the importance of diversity in the upper ranks for years now. Yet C-suites and boardrooms continue to underscore the dearth of Black representation. Why hasn't real progress been made? Is it because of what you just said in that statement? Is that a part of it? We're not holding folks accountable. We're not asking for receipts.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is kind of goes back to Karen's statement about economics, and money speaks and money drives results. I think we also have been practicing diversity and inclusion for a long time. And the practice of diversity is really about representation, and inclusion is about behavior. And neither of those things change the structure of the system. And the default operating system in America is racism. And so you can trim at the margins all you want. You can put some of us in different places, but the systems weren't built for us. And so, you know, we will be charged with creating more diverse spaces. We will be held accountable by white leadership. We will burn out from microaggressions, and we will leave those spaces and nothing will change. Equity is different. Equity is about power, and it is about resources. It's about who owns, who has the power to invite, who sets the rules. And so I do believe that we are at this incredible moment in our history, that the year 2020 will be studied, that the world is cracking open with the largest uprisings in our history that center Blackness. And so we are at a moment, and I do think that our civil rights ancestors, the Black Panthers, that they pushed the Voting Rights Act that has since been disfanged, but that's another bottle of wine. But the Voting Rights Act was a result of our ancestors pushing for that change. And the young, brilliant, Black-led youth organizers are calling for systems change right now. And something is on the other side of it. Something awaits us. And I think many of us are in the position where we are, and have long been, having our own uprisings in the suites. And so I think it's extremely important for us to not perform racial equity, because many of us are being asked to do that, to not be complicit in inequitable systems and make people feel better because we are Black people standing near inequity, that we are beholden now to really push this through to completely recreate systems and structures.
Do we have, Carlos, I'm going to ask you to respond to that same question, your thoughts on the gap between the words of diversity and inclusion in the boardrooms and the C-suites and the results. But I'm also going to ask you, what do we need to do differently? How can we change that? So tell me why you think we're having the issue and what you think might be a way to address it.
Yeah, so I think we have the issue because there just has not been a recognition, to Angelique's point, of what's really driving where we are today. People don't want to recognize that race really does matter, and it plays a role in absolutely every part of our society, including corporate America. And until we actually recognize that, call that out, deal with that, in a lot of respects, we are kind of spinning our wheels. So I think now is a time where it's in our faces. We really cannot ignore it. Those conversations are at the boardroom level, right? And now the question is, what will the board do? And, I think about things in very, very simple terms. When you have a problem, you identify that problem, you figure out what your gaps are, you develop a plan, you get some solutions, and then you hold yourself accountable to those solutions. That happens around business tables all across America, and things get solved. The question is, why can't this thing get solved, right? And that is because no one wants to really intentionally recognize and think through all of the systems that are at play with racism, and how do we sit down and attack and solve the problem. So until we really think about it in those contexts and start with recognizing what the actual issue is and calling it out, we continue to spin our wheels.
Darcy, on that same point, I heard a few years back, Melody Hobson was having it was in conversation with Melody Hobson during the business luncheon at Urban Hack. And I was standing in the back of the room, and it felt like church, because she said to the person interviewing her, Connie Lindsay from Northern Press, what I heard her say, so I'm going to paraphrase, it's not enough that it's not happening to you. What are you willing to sacrifice for what you believe? And going back to the original question, why are we still here? Is it, and I've asked myself this question, and I've not always enjoyed the answer. Are we willing to sacrifice? Have we, the more successful we get when we're the one or the two in the room, have we become so fear-averted, where we placate, we go out and message when it's time to do a diversity message? I've got the title, no budget, no staff, but I got the title, so I go out there and do it. So I want to talk about, get your thoughts, Darcy. Where does the accountability lie? Because again, I think we just said it, two worlds. I can't worry about that world, the other one right now. I'm worried about this kitchen table. So I want to kind of look at us and go, Are we willing collectively, generally, just your opinion? Is it a fear of sacrificing? Are we not willing to give up like our forebears did for what we believe or what we say we believe?
Honestly,
Yes, please.
A lot of people, they're not.
Okay.
They have occupied seats at tables. They've gotten comfortable. They've gotten fat. They've gotten full. And they are unwilling to recognize the next generation and what they bring and how they can continue to move things forward. And until, unfortunately, you pull that chair out from up under them, they're not willing to feel what it feels like to move things forward. They're comfortable. They've made it and pulled up that ladder right behind them. But as a younger child, you don't want to eat alone. Won't you enjoy your meal better when you have family there with you? Won't you get more things done when you work with someone that has the same mindset and can help strengthen you? And let's just be honest, in corporate America, just a shoulder to cry on and vent to on those hard days. So in short, no, they're not ready to give it up. But the thing is, we're coming. Specifically Gen X, I'm very sensitive to it because clearly there wasn't enough of us, so we don't have as much pull as baby boomers and millennials. But here's the piece that you're missing. All this time, we've been learning, we've been pushing, we've been grinding it out, and we had to learn the hard way. And the thing is, we're solid on it. So now is the time where either you are going to acquiesce and make room for us, or we're just going to bulldoze through.
I was just thinking about something. Don't you also think that it is the culture that the company creates when that one Black person is there and we feel that, okay, you're okay, this one Black person, and we're representing kind of everybody. They have not helped create a culture for you to be able to connect to someone else and bring them along.
But why aren't you? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, John, please.
Why aren't you in there pushing that culture? Why are you not?
Because there's a fear that they're going to be penalized for doing that. We just had an issue here in Detroit. There was a picture put on Instagram from Dan Gilbert's company for their marketing interns. 22, 24, no people of color. So everybody's circulating. And I said, well, I'm not going to circulate it. I'm going to call. I called 3 people there and said, what's going on? Somebody explain to me. So 1, there was another group where there was a little more diversity. 2, I talked to the chief diversity officer that I know and that I like and have a lot of respect for, and someone else. And we ended up talking. But the reality is just like, you said, it's the environment. The bigger issue becomes, and I said this earlier, we have to stick together. So when somebody comes after Tiffany for speaking up, it's up to all of us to stand up and say, no, you're not going to come for Tiffany because she's doing what she's supposed to do and she's speaking up. But they don't do it. We also have to understand that hate is in the heart. And so we have to tackle that, but that hate has to stop with us. The worst thing in the world for me is for me to speak to another Black woman and have her look at me like I got 3 heads. I speak to Black people. I expect them to speak back. I mean, we look differently. We got all this. Okay, but we are who we are. Yeah. And until we see our personal success and the success of others, and willing to uplift them, I need you to succeed. Because I need to know that you're going to say, you know what, Karen, I'm here. What can I do to help?
Safety in numbers.
Hey, let me. I'm sorry.
No. I love this. And this goes back to the conversation I was having about, we all have healing to do. You cannot be Black or brown, indigenous, female in America and not have a treasure trove of trauma that is, it's just deep. So what I'm finding right now for me, it is those conversations where it's almost like the Kinsey scale. I was never close to a 10, it just was my nature. But let's talk crabs in the barrel. I mean, these are things that have been ingrained in us. And I think even the best of us, this is the time where we have to do some self-checking as well, where I have to literally sit down in a corner, if I don't tell anybody else, just me, hey, Darius, are you actively? I mean, like Angelique said, hold yourself accountable for receipts. Are we actively, and Karen, I do know from 20 plus years of knowing you, you do walk the talk. But for everyone else, are we actively holding ourselves accountable? Are we actively holding ourselves accountable when we're talking about this? And what I'm finding for the remainder of my days, I'm gonna hold myself really accountable where I get on my nerve, where I say to myself, are you doing this? Are you making sure we space? Is that a part of the issue? Because it's not, it's sometimes, it seeps into us so deeply, we're so busy just trying to survive. The trauma, as George Floyd proved, it's always one step beneath the surface, ready to have the wound scratched off again. So it's part of that, what should we be doing collectively, us? Because we don't talk about mental health, we don't talk about those things. Angelique, I'm gonna look to you to kind of guide us on this, because you said to me, and it resonated so deeply, we are, all of us, nobody's immune to this in America, for this history that was here long before we showed up. So right. Angelique, talk to me about how we can manage all of that individually, together, collectively, to really get to the place where Karen talks about this getting, where we trust each other enough to create space for each other.
You know, one of the things that I say is so important is anti-racism training. And I talk about how, of course, it's important for white people, but it's more important for people of color. Mm. And the reason is that we have grown up in this caste system. We've gotten all the same messages. And many of us are in positions of power now because we have benefited from assimilation to the dominant caste. And I'm reading Isabel Wilkerson's Caste right now.
Okay.
You can tell.
Okay.
But that is the reality. And so we're often then asked to speak on behalf of communities that we aren't a part of. And we do more damage. Mm. And we also internalize these problems and haven't unpacked our own trauma, which is generational and inherited. And so I am the first to say that, you know, it starts with training, it starts with therapy, it starts with the sister circle, it starts with the bench. You know, we actually have to go into this not thinking that in spite of we will, but we have to directly confront the trauma and the history that continues today, or else we won't be able to begin to heal. We won't be able to actually recognize it, because racism isn't just interpersonal, it's an exquisite design of systems. And it's so well designed, it's impossible to recognize sometimes. And so we are actually perpetuating it and legitimizing it. And so without that work internally and externally, we're a part of the problem.
Yeah.
Darice, I'm going to jump right in because
please
I
do
100% with what Angelique just said, right? We live in a world that their unconscious biases runs rampant, right? Almost to the point where it's normal. And when you're in these kind of institutions and you're fighting this unconscious bias, whether it be your ideas, not being taken seriously or whatever, the idea sometimes of speaking up for someone else of color to kind of go through that exact same thing, right? Where we've seen promotions and titles handed out, but power not necessarily given, right? All of these things happen on a regular basis that you're constantly, you know, fighting left and right. So to bring another one in that situation, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, right? I've been, Darice, as you know, I fight the fight with tooth and nail, you know, without any hesitation. But I can also see someone else's point of view and standpoint, whether they may or might not want to fight that fight, right? Like you said, taking care of the kitchen table for your family sometimes become the most important thing. But again, for a group of people that, as was put to me one time, live in a right-handed world, if you're left-handed in that world, or you know, it's difficult to navigate, and to bring someone else into that, you know, right-handed world along with you sometimes is there's a hesitation there. But at the same time, I think there are other things that can be done, right? If it's not in fighting internally in that corporation, maybe it's getting that corporation to support the next generation of you, so that there's 3 people in the room next time versus just the one.
And before I move on to the next question, as moderator, I'm going to take the liberty of going back to first do no harm. There are, again, the scale, here's perhaps the takeaway for our community. First, do no harm. If you don't have the courage, then at least don't be an enemy. At least don't be a hindrance. You know, so that would be that. Let's move on. We've got about, just to give you all, we've been talking, we've got about 12 minutes before we'll start with Q&A. Audience members, please jump into this conversation, shoot your questions. We're going to try to get to as many of them as possible, but this is good stuff. Thank you. I'm going to throw this question and give you all time to think about it. So I'm going to ask Angelique, and then Corliss, and then Tiffany. So let me read the question. Research finding from Echoing Green and Bridgespan laid bare the racial disparity in today's funding environment, suggesting that population level impact cannot happen without funding more leaders of color. An article in the New York Times that was titled Philanthropy, Race is Still a Factor in Who Gets What, found that nonprofit groups led by Black and Latino directors lag behind peers with white leaders. How can foundations truly move the needle in Black and Brown communities if the folks in control of where those dollars go have no lived experience related to the communities that they purport they want to support? Angelique, any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, that's my whole raison d'etre at the Field Foundation. That's what we've been working on. That's what racial justice and philanthropy looks like.
Yeah. And Angelique, I'm going to jump in. I just want to say this why I asked Angelique. Angelique turned the needle from the moment she walked in. Field Foundation was not always as deeply squarely rooted in equity as they are now. That was by design, and you started that from the day you walked into the organization. Am I correct?
That's correct.
All right.
But I will say that it is a collaborative journey that we are on, and we still have far to go. It's not something that we've accomplished. We have a range of folks. We had a conversation about white allyship for a hot minute earlier. That's a whole other bottle of wine to talk about. But our board, Marshall Field V, is on our board and is a big supporter of this work that we got to collectively. But philanthropy is a huge part of the problem. I'll just say that. And so, these are often very well-meaning white people who have an academic interest in issue areas as opposed to lived experience. And so a lot of the issues that philanthropy claims they want to solve are actually created by philanthropy itself. From how we fund, who we fund, metrics that are put on those dollars, the fallacy of expertise being in philanthropy, the way that our endowments are invested and who manages the money. I mean, there's a wide range of complexity. And also, I don't know if I have the answer to if racial equity in philanthropy is even possible. I mean, it is actually about power and resources in an elite group of people making decisions on behalf of others. So, so I think we're trying to figure this out. But one of the things that we realized, and there's a lot that we've been working on, is that social impact does not organize itself as a 501c3 necessarily. Okay, so that is a structure that's been created because you have access to high net worth individuals who can serve on your board and give you money that can turn into working capital. Social impact is the person who lives on your block, is a neighborhood group, is a business. I actually have seen more policy change come out of companies than I've seen come out of Congress. So I think that it's actually, philanthropy needs to catch up with how social impact works and has to start funding differently. So absolutely Black-led, folks of color-led organizations in communities of color has to be a commitment that philanthropy makes, has to say how much of their portfolio they're going to commit to it so that they can be held accountable by the community. Removing metrics Stop putting ridiculous metrics on grants, expecting the world to change in 6 months.
Oh my
Actually,
God.
give money and get out of the way, and give money directly to individuals, and then moonwalk away.
Oh, and sorry I clapped. That was the foundation executive director of me going, yes. But sorry, Corliss, what are your thoughts? Thank you, Angelique.
I'm gonna
Okay,
snap.
baby.
Because there's not too much to add there. I'll just add a little bit of color to a few points that she made. Certainly, philanthropy is not the expert in the issues that our nonprofit communities are attacking, are solving. So first, there needs to be a recognition that philanthropy, it does not have that expertise. That's why there are folks on the ground that are doing this work. So to her point of empowering those folks with dollars, which represent that power, that is where philanthropy can play this role. The other thing about the onerous requirements of data and reporting back.
You spend more time collecting data than doing the work.
And nobody really uses it. That's the secret, right? So that's just wasted resources and wasted time for both philanthropy and the organization, when all of those resources can be really put toward what the real work is improving our communities. So, a philanthropy does have a lot of work to do to look insular. And, there is the philanthropy that, for example, Angelique leads with the Field Foundation, but there's also corporate philanthropy that's out there as well, which is a bit of a different animal and comes attached with a corporate environment, a corporate ethos. And there's an opportunity there as well to really take a step back, look insular, and say, what can we do from this seat of influence, from this power, because money does represent power. What can we do with this power to increase community impact? Those questions do need to be asked around the philanthropy spectrum.
Tiffany.
I'm co-signing everything Corliss and Angelique just said.
Yeah.
But what really comes to mind with me, and I worked at a foundation, as you know, Darice, is probably why you added me to this question, a family foundation for a couple of years, coming from corporate America. And what I found it to be was very prescriptive, right? We know better about what you should do in your community, right? And so for me, and you guys have said this, and I'm just kind of digging deeper into it, it is having representation. Yes, those families like the Fields and whoever else have the money, but there has to be representation around those trustees, around that board of really truly what's happening in that community. If you were truly trying to make change in the community, this theoretical approach that we program officers feel who hadn't been in these communities, there's a surface level there that we can never connect to, right? So understanding, it's like know your audience, what you're funding, what is your goal, and you have to meet these communities and these community-based organizations because the money needs to go to the grassroots of that community, right? And so what foundations truly have to do, and I believe they have the capacity to do, is be more creative, Angelique, as you were saying, about how you give those dollars out. Because there's a capacity issue, and I am expecting you in 2 years over with $300,000 to get A, B, C, and done, and you still need a technical assistance piece where you're gonna fail. So we have to work on the front end with these organizations, and we're saying at the end of the day, it's building up this community. How do we build it up? There has to be a plan that is connected to community. It is not rocket science, but it is knowing kind of where you're putting your dollars and listening to what that community is, having the courage to also bring people in that community at the table with you.
Yeah, and trusting them that they understand what they're talking about, whether they have a degree from Yale like your colleagues or not.
Absolutely.
I want to do, because I do want to make sure we get to questions, something, Karen, you're, as she's called, Big Gretch in my home state of Michigan. Look at, okay.
But that's a cultural appropriation. We don't need to do that. And they want to buy her bus. Don't invite her to the cookout. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, this is going to be a fun question then.
Yeah, it will be.
Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer recently signed an order declaring racism a public health crisis in Michigan, creating a Black Leadership Advisory Council to elevate, quote, elevate Black voices. And she's asking the Michigan Department of Human and Health Services to have all state employees undergo implicit bias training and, quote, make health equity a major goal. Here's my question to you, and I think okay, let me finish it, because I guess, okay. What does this mean? What does this really mean to Michiganians? And do you think it's going to make a difference?
Well, let me tell you this. I mean, people a lot of times don't do their homework. And so that looks good. It reads well. We write, quotable quotes and sound bites, and we come up with things that sound good. It's what we do for a living. But the reality is that health disparities have existed long before COVID-19, and any person of color, any Black person in that arena knew that it existed. The president of the AMA is an African-American woman. It didn't take COVID-19, to be able to tell her that there are healthcare disparities. The implicit bias training, I think it should be at the state level. It should be across the board, because it does bring a level of awareness to people's actions and reactions to things that are driven by race. I agree with that, but we don't need another committee. We got all kinds of committees. We got 77,000 nonprofit organizations in the state of Michigan. We got all kinds of stuff, and nothing has changed the needle. So yeah, I mean, again, as I always say, it looks good and it reads well, but it doesn't it's not substantive. It's not something that's going to make a difference. So.
Got it. Fair enough. Here's my final question from me before we take questions from our family of audience members. And I would love to hear from everyone here as succinctly as you can tell us. As we talk about moving into action, what two things can our audience do tomorrow, big or small, to really help move the needle, help address, help dismantle in some way systemic racism and anti-blackness? Two things, Karen.
I'm gonna say it starts with us. Stop hating and help. Real simple. I mean, when I speak at schools, I tell kids all the time, when if you see somebody that looks like you, let that be reason enough for you to help them. If you can't help them, do not hurt them. Start to see your success and the success of others that look like you. And when somebody helps you, don't forget to reach back, say thank you, and bring somebody else along. This isn't brain surgery. We don't need a committee. We don't need a study. We don't need any of that. It's just, I am committed to helping you as much as I am to helping myself. And I want to see and celebrate the success of others who look like me.
Thank you. Darice Brown, two things.
Backing off of Karen, strengthen your village and vote and figure out how to help somebody else vote.
Those are brilliant. Thank you. Corliss Garner. Thank you, Darice.
I would just say educate yourself and be present to recognize all of the ways that systemic racism exists, and particularly around anti-blackness. And then find one area for you that you have passion and focus on that. Let that be your activism. If kneeling for the flag is not your thing, very good. Find something else that is your thing and take that lane and do it well, and don't judge other people's version of activism. All activism is necessary and needed in order to move us forward.
Jerell Parker, what say you?
Mine will be geared for everyone, but especially those on this group. I would say be present, right? These communities that we want to help, we want to serve, do it from the C-suite, but I think it's equally as important that, our presence is felt in a lot of these communities so they can really see that tangible example of that and reach back, right? That's the other thing, right? Let's not get to where we are comfortable and forget to reach back, right? A lot of times 40% of your salary or whatever it is the world to someone else. So even if it's getting someone started at an introductory level of the industry that we represent, reach back.
Thank you, sir. Tiffany Hamel Johnson. You're on mute.
I'm like,
you get the prize for the first mute.
I know. I'm like, oh,
we almost made it.
I was trying to.
Okay.
know our history.
Mm.
Know our history. We have failed in that for this generation. I'm 53 years old, and grace of God, my parents, my grandparents, my friends, my mentors have really helped me, fill in the spots that maybe I didn't know because I didn't maybe struggle in the same place. And when you understand your history and what it took for our ancestors to get where they are, and this is not rocket science, but so many of us don't, we take it for granted. That's one. Reach back and mentor someone. One person. I don't care what age you are. I don't care if you think you're young. Someone that you can take the journey with and you're learning together. That is another thing that we must do.
Final word, Angelique Power.
Equity is about shifting power and resources. So use your power to shift resources. Do it in systems with voting. Couldn't agree with that more. Being counted in the census. And then also use your own resources. Invest. Commit to give money to Black businesses, to Black theaters and Black art galleries, to organizations that do things like provide bail for the uprisings that are happening. The Chicago Community Bond Fund is a great place, but give your money and give it often. We are all philanthropists, actually. Each one of us are philanthropists in our family, in our faith communities. Let's be strategic with our dollars and make sure that we are investing in our own communities.
Okay. Let's get some questions in our time. And before we continue on, you all, I hope this is nourishing for our listeners, our audience, as it is for me. Thank you. And I'll thank you again for your time, for your candor. These conversations just matter, and they're doing so much for my spirit, and I hope they're doing it for those listening. Let's get a few questions here. Oh, we'll start with you, Kelly O. I'm inspired by the Black power on this panel, exclamation point. I'm interested in your views on how to engage white allies ready to move beyond, quote, book club and show up as active accomplices in the fight. Oh, that's a great question. Darcy, okay. Kelly O, Darcy's gonna take your question. Darcy? Great question.
So, white allyship. So the first thing we have to do when we begin to engage with our white allies is figure out where they're coming from. And that involves sometimes a very uncomfortable conversation. But if you are going to get in and do this work, you are going to, as the panel has been saying, you're going to have to get uncomfortable because, again, racism, we don't enjoy racism. We don't enjoy experiencing it. So, yeah, you're going to be a little uncomfortable because you're going to go against the grain. But I think it's absolutely necessary. I think about myself. I have a few very strong white allies, and they will I've watched them go to bat for me. And it's because we don't have the power in a lot of these situations because of of systematic racism. White allies are absolutely necessary. But I will use this caveat. Generally, and I'm just speaking for me, my strongest white allies have been white men. Because for whatever reason, white women, white women have some, I don't
Speak
know.
on it. Yeah.
White
Safe, brave
women,
space.
I think what it is there's such a push for women to advance. White women sometimes feel that we're taking something from them instead of recognizing what we can gain together.
Okay.
Well, don't wear a Black Lives Matter t-shirt if you're afraid to speak to a Black person when you pass them wearing that t-shirt.
Or Or if you connect with me and you post all these beautiful sayings and inspirations on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, but you have zero, you won't even make an effort to get to know a Black person. I don't know who you sharing all these gifts with, but it's not us. So.
And I'm going to, anyone else want to take Kelly's great question?
I just would say that it's important that we need white allies. And thank you, Kelly, for tuning in. And thank you for asking the question. This isn't a problem that folks of color created. And this is not a problem that we can be put, as Karen said, on a task force to solve. We need everybody in this fight. And so, you know, there was some sign on Instagram that was a white woman holding that was like, this Karen wants to speak to a manager about racism. It's like, use your power and privilege for good. And we need you. And so that mitigation that you need to do as a white ally, which is when do I step up and when do I sit down? Yeah. That's a mitigation we do every day of our lives about this topic. So welcome in, need you, and it's gonna be bumpy. And there are gonna be times you feel like you do it well. There are times you're gonna feel like you have been shut down and you didn't do it well, but stay in it. That is how we know you're an ally, if you stay in it.
Yeah. If I could just add, I can't tell you how many times I've heard from a white person, well, I'm afraid to say the wrong thing. I don't know if I'm going to offend. And I think oftentimes that prevents people from stepping in. Lean into that. And what I say to that, yeah, you probably will say the wrong thing. You probably will offend. But it's okay. We're in this conversation together and we can learn together. So thank you, Kelly. That's my girl, Kelly. She's my LGC fellow.
Yes, Kelly. And you know, and I would say this, Kelly, I think there is a spirit of discernment that we on this side, I had to, you know, when I was overseeing the LGBT Center in Michigan, I would talk to folks about that spirit of discernment and how two white guys at U of M both asked me about this hair. One in my gut, I went, oh, these are fighting words. The other guy became a lifelong friend because I had to take a breath, but it's hard when you're fighting all day, every day. But then by the same token, Kelly, you can't, not Kelly, because Kelly is an ally. White folk, you can't go, well, I tried it once and their lifetime of trauma they're having a really rough day because they, you know, they've been under trauma all day. They didn't give me the best response, so I'm done. It's gotta be, no, this is 400 plus years of our shared collective history. There are gonna be good days and bad days. And I think all of us, but certainly allies, would benefit from, if you say it inelegantly and I tell you have, my bad. Tell me what I need to know. But lean into it. It's not my job to do it. And it is not my job to make you feel safe and comfortable because there's a lot going on. We're, you know, it's a lot going on. So I think on both sides, but really for our allies, I always say, you know, take the hit sometime and just go, I get it, because trauma is trauma. And let's all remember the why. If we can remember the why, these moments of friction or inelegance, the why is to get this country to its greatest promise. Andrea T, thank you, Kelly, that is fantastic. Andrea T, is it possible, oh, this is a good question. Is it possible to address and validate the needs of everyone while pushing forcefully for the dismantling of systemic racism? I think we know the question Andrea is asking here. Who wants to take it? Can you do both?
I think that this is the what about question. I haven't seen it, but I think that this is what pops up whenever you do talk about anti-racism work. It's the what about LGBTQ plus, what about rural white people, what about differently abled, what about, and you know, I always say, yes, that's right. I mean, these are all marginalized communities by design. That said, that if you look inside of these different marginalized communities and you look at how folks of color fare within those marginalized classes, and you look how Black folks fare, even within the folks of color that are struggling, you realize that you have to stay on race. You have to start with race, you have to center race. And that doesn't mean that then you don't also achieve intersectionality and realize that that people show up with different identities, that there are a lot of different oppressions that we have to fight against. But the what about question always takes us to putting everything in the basket, and inevitably, then we put race on the side.
Final question. Oh, Tiffany, you have something you want to weigh in, please?
Yeah, I was trying to look this up, Angelique, coming off of what you said. What is that? I can't remember who said this, and it starts with, they came for this. Remember that saying, you guys, who said that?
Yeah, at first they came for the blank. I'll ask Google. Hold on one second.
Yes, I was like, you guys remember
Roderick
that?
Hawkins?
Yeah.
Roderick Hawkins, could you send in the information, please?
I literally was trying to text
Google,
Roderick, but we're talking. Like, Roderick,
So in our limited remaining time, I want to, here's a question. I'm going to mix two questions together. Did he do it?
Martin Niemöller.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. You guys should look that up.
So this is a question I'm going to kind of conflate two questions. Philanthropy. The question is suggesting from Anonymous, it feels like when you hear the word philanthropy, it's huge sums of money, the Fords, the Rockefellers, the Fields. How does a person, a Black person, even touch philanthropy? How do you engage with philanthropy? Let's assume that this person has an idea or a project or a community group. How do you even begin that conversation? Because that is a good question. Because for me, you're either in it or you're not. I don't know what the on-ramp is because I got on 30 years ago. I can't imagine what that would look like now for an organization getting started. Angelique, you know I'm going to come to you first on this.
I didn't know. So I think there's two sides to this. There's the question of like, how do you understand yourself as a philanthropist? And I had said this briefly earlier, but many of us are the philanthropists in our family. We take care of a lot of people, and we have done that for a long period of time. We give money in a different way than asking for a proposal and doing a site visit. We give money easily, we give it often, we give it through cash. We don't report on it in our taxes. And so I think, first of all, we have to flip the notion of who is a philanthropist. Because that is, you know, I think when you understand that it's volunteerism, that it's taking care of your family, that it's taking care of your neighbors, taking care of your faith community, you will understand that Black communities are some of the biggest philanthropists and have always been throughout time. So we are all there. Now, there is a structured, based on capitalism, philanthropic sector that exists, and it is woefully understaffed by folks of color and by Black people. I think the average board of trustees has 14% folks of color nationwide. There are less than 8% CEOs that are folks of color nationwide. And often if you do see staff of color, it's program assistants, it's administrative levels. And so I think similar to the demands that need to be made on corporate boards and on corporate leadership, these are demands that need to be made of philanthropy. At the Field Foundation, our board is 80% folks of color. Our staff is 75%. Our giving is 80 to 90% in Black, Indigenous, POC-led organizations. I think that we have to push to make these changes happen. And when we push, the changes will happen.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to stop us there. Thank you. We expect to continue having these conversations. Chicago State Foundation takes great pride, not only being the chief fundraising partner to Chicago State University, this incredible university, but we take great pride in creating the space for convening conversations like this. What you all have done tonight, I can't thank you enough. You are all incredibly busy folk, but that you would take time when we called, your yeses were quick, and I know you all have busy schedules and you made room for this and you brought your best selves. I hope to continue having conversations, and so you can't say no. Publicly, I'm going to invite you all back now and say thank you for accepting. Wow, you're wonderful people, you're good people. But I want to leave us with, again, from one of our panelists. Her parents said this to her, because we are at 75 days. I live my life in a countdown. And just so you know, today I got you are registered for your mail-in ballot. You're expected by this date. It's coming by this date. I've marked it all on my calendar because if I don't have it, I'm checking in. Once you do it, you can check this. And then I'm going to share that with 5 other people at least. That's every day. So one of our panelists, Angelique, her parents said, never forget to vote, but do not mistake your vote for freedom. That needs to be fought for every day. My goodness. Karen Dumas, Darice Brown, Corliss Garner, Jerell Parker, Tiffany Hamel Johnson, Angelique Power. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We appreciate you. Thank you for being in the arena, staying in the arena and making room to have these conversations. We are so proud to share this space with you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Darius.
Thank you, Darius. Thank you, everyone.
Darius, thanks, Kevin. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, good people.
Bye.
And we're going to keep this moving. Listen, it is a pleasure to hand over the reins to my partner in good trouble, who is also one of my bosses at the Chicago State Foundation Board of Directors, Christina Steed. She is one of the nation's top multicultural public relations leaders. Hey, there she is. Christina is the Executive Vice President of Client Relations with Flowers Communications Group, based right here in Chicago. She has had lead accountability for new business development, client relations, and external marketing for the agency. Additionally, Christina provides strategic counsel for several of the agency's key clients, key accounts including Dow Chemical, Nike Chicago, City of Chicago, and Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago. In addition to her role at Flowers, Christina is the host of one of my favorite podcasts, First Over 40. Check it out if you haven't, with a lifelong commitment to quality storytelling. Christina began her career in broadcast journalism after receiving her BS in journalism from the University of Illinois. And you have an MA in strategic communications from the University of Missouri. Oh, the prestigious Columbia School of Journalism. That explains a lot. Christina, my friend, the floor is yours. Take it away. Have a good conversation. Good night, everybody. Thank you, Christina.
Good night, Darius. Thank you so much. We are now going to kick off part 2 of America's Original Sin, Where Do We Go From Here? And my panelists tonight are going to be talking about education, equity, and social activism. And clearly that is on the tip of everyone's lips in terms of what's going on in our news cycle, in our world, and in our country. So I'm very excited to be here tonight. Thank you again, Darius. Thank you to the Chicago State Foundation, the previous panelists, and Chair David, who provided our introduction. So I'm just going to get into it. So we can have all the time to discuss because there is so much to cover. So I'm going to introduce our panelists tonight. Our first panelist, Dr. Richard Glass Jr., is the founder and executive director of Boys Lab, an innovative 3-year cohort laboratory classroom designed to deliver inquiry-based academic programming for boys beginning in 4th grade. Boys Lab began as a demonstration classroom model in association with Chicago International Charter School with an ancillary focus on teacher training, educational research, and providing professional development to urban educators. An experienced and committed educator and leader, Richard has previously served as principal of Legacy Charter School, Urban Prep Academy, Bronzeville, and Stephen F. Gale Academy. In 2015, Richard was named Principal of the Year by the Illinois Network of Charter Schools. A lifelong Chicagoan, Richard is a 1998 graduate of Chicago State University. We love to hear that, doctor, and has a master's degree in education from Concordia University and an MS in nonprofit management from the Spiritus Institute. In June 2016, he received a Master of Science in Education in Elementary Teaching from Northwestern University. Dr. also earned a Master of Education in Special Education from the University of Illinois at Chicago in May of 2019. Thank you again for joining us, Doctor. Our next panelist is Dawn Jones. Living the dream is how Emmy Award-winning news anchor Dawn Jones describes her 30-year career in broadcasting. In addition to anchoring WJRT Television's top-rated First at 4 newscast, Dawn is the host of Newsmaker, the ABC affiliate's weekly public affairs show. Dawn began her broadcast career on Detroit radio in the late 1980s. Over the years, she has performed in both leadership and service positions as a talk show host, reporter, news anchor, news director, program director, on-air personality, and traffic announcer. Dawn has also served as communications director for the city of Flint in Michigan. A native of Flint, Michigan, Dawn is the graduate of Flint Central High School and Specs Howard School of Broadcast Arts. Love me some journalism, people. Thank you for joining us, Dawn. Our next panelist is Claude Robinson. As the lead practitioner and passionate advocate of UCAN's Comprehensive Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative, Claude provides strategic and hands-on management of the 150-year-old nonprofit's results-driven commitment to DE&I. He has earned a reputation for shaping and informing DE&I through his engagement in national strategic action networks and member associations, both of which value his experience, expertise, and enthusiasm. Under Claude's leadership, UCAN is committed to making a deep and lasting community impact in North Lawndale. Claude regularly advances UCAN's community focus by facilitating win-win relationships between the agency and a growing number of organizations, nonprofits, associations, schools, and elected officials who host meetings, activities, conferences, and special events at UCAN's headquarters on Chicago's West Side. A Chicago native, Claude earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater and a master's degree in community counseling from Chicago State University. Come on now, another CSU. Yes, 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 yes. Our next panelist is Daniel Rogers, Southside. Yes, I'm a Southsider as well. Southside native of Chicago. Daniel Rogers is the CEO and co-founder of AM Money, a financial lending company that elevates its consideration of the career potential of the student over the credit history of the co-signer, making it easier for college students in need to obtain financial support. Prior to founding AM Money, Rogers was the COO at MoneyThink, where he worked to ensure that youth around the country had the financial capability that he did not have for himself, and many of us didn't have. I'm speaking for me as well. Under his leadership, MoneyThink grew from a chapter-based nonprofit into an award-winning educational technology firm. Daniel served tours as a reconnaissance specialist in Operation Iraqi Freedom for the U.S. Army and as a foreign affairs officer in Afghanistan and Pakistan for the U.S. State Department. He holds a BA from American University and an MBA in analytical finance and entrepreneurship from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. And then our final participant is Stevie Vallis. Chicago Vote's executive director, Stevie Vallis, grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, but has lived all over the place: Michigan, Virginia, Alabama, Washington, D.C., Dallas, Austin, and now calls Chicago home. A graduate of HBCU, Oakwood University, where he earned a bachelor's in social work, Stevie has committed his entire career to making sure all people have a voice and are welcomed as equals. Prior to joining Chicago Votes, Stevie was the director of National Voter Registration Day and has worked in the United States Senate, the Texas legislature, and on a wide range of campaigns, from presidential and gubernatorial to affordable housing. Stevie is a member of the Circle of Justice Innovations, the Board of Change Illinois, the Cook County Community Advisory Council, and the City of Chicago Civic Engagement Advisory Council. Welcome, Stevie. So welcome to all my panelists, and I just kind of want to get into these questions and this conversation around education equity and social activism. So, you know, kind of coming off of our previous panel, talking about a lot in the philanthropy space and corporate DE&I, I want to kind of pose the same introductory question that Darius posed to the panel in terms of, do you believe that this country has the fortitude and fearlessness to really, in this moment in time, deal with and address head-on the issues of anti-blackness in a measurable, sustainable way? And when we think about that, thinking through the lens of education, thinking through the lens of kind of how social media is underpinning and emboldening and pushing forward some of these movements. So I'll start with you, Dr. Glass.
Oh, I was hoping you didn't start with me. I would say the same thing as Karen. I would say a resounding no as far as old America is concerned. I think that we talk often about institutional racism, and it was not, created or sustained all of these years for nothing. So those who have created those systems are holding on for dear life, and they don't have the fortitude to change anything. I do think that there's a new America being born, and those young people who are protesting in the streets nonstop are a representation of that new America. And I think that they do have the fearlessness and the fortitude to forge a new path. And I'm looking forward to just being their support, because I believe that this fight is one that they should lead and that we should support. And I'm excited for that.
Thank you. Don, I'm turning you in the journalist seat. You are seeing a lot. Same question. And even kind of through the lens of, as a journalist, we're taught to be objective. We're taught to, show both sides and kind of, I think even that is being picked apart now in terms of, whose objectivity are we looking at this through and how are we evaluating that? So love to hear your thoughts.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you and thank Darius for having me be a part of this panel. But I think that America is really at a crossroads right now when we look at these uprisings that have taken place over the past few months. And what we decide to do in this moment is really going to chart the course, as many people were talking about, this new America. So I have been encouraged as a journalist, the stories that we've been telling. I've been encouraged by some of the signs that I've seen, the young people out in the street, also the allies, the diverse voices that I've seen who have decided to join this movement. Also, I'm being encouraged and inspired by what we're seeing politically with the nomination of Kamala Harris to the vice president's post. But at the same time, I'm also discouraged, when you look at, they decided to take Aunt Jemima off of the box of pancake mix, and she's been there 130 years. You know what has happened in 130 years? We've had the civil rights movement, we've had the women's suffrage movement, we've made so many strides, and who decided 130 years later that now is the time? So I don't think that a lot of these things are sincere. So when I look at that to balance it out, I don't know if America has the fearlessness and fortitude to forge a new path, but I am encouraged by the young people who are picking up the mantle and letting their voices be heard.
So that's very interesting. You say the other things that are being done, Aunt Jemima being taken off, now it's okay to kneel. Everybody's kneeling, but no one has anything to lose now. Claude, can you talk a little bit about that? And take yourself off mute.
To the question of, does America have the fortitude to end this madness that's been around for centuries? I'm cautiously optimistic and skeptical at the same time. I understand that there are many people who benefit from these systems, and those benefactors get a chance to dip in and dip out and not have this as a lived experience. I'm aware of that, but I'm also encouraged by a lot of what I'm seeing with young people, and to the point of allies who I want to see become accomplices to this, where they actually will go to jail with us during this struggle. And to the other point is, America is really a young, if you look at this globally, is really a young republic and hasn't had a lot of time to really evolve in things. There are countries that have been around for thousands of years, and there have been iterations and things. And when you look at the demographics ethnically that are happening, the changes that are coming along, I see that as hopeful. Meaning, we talk about Kamala Harris, we talk about the changes politically with the midterms and things like that. I'm hopeful. there'll be a change. And I think we have to be patient with this, even though there are some who are saying we can't be patient. America just hasn't had the time to mature and become what the lofty ideals that were written. It just hasn't had the time to do that. There are too many that are holding on to these rigid beliefs of manifest destiny, rugged individualism and things of that nature. And I think that stuff is melting away at this point in time. And to Don's point, it's a crossroads where there's a transformational change that's coming. I know I want to see it, as a father of a 20-year-old son, a 9-year-old son, and a 4-year-old daughter. I know I want to see something different for their lives, and I'm gonna keep doing what I can to make that a reality.
No, that's a great point that you make in terms of the framing and us reminding us about the history of our country and the history of civilization and different governments in different countries, and even the advent and growth of technology and how we have grown leaps and bounds within the past 100 years in terms of how we access technology and how that supports movements and keeps us going forward. So Stevie, I'd love to get your perspective on that question as well.
Thank you for having me. I'll say that before I jump to answering. I don't know. I think I would hope so. I fundamentally believe that the change that I ultimately want to see won't happen in my lifetime. And I'm content with that. I think our role right now as young people in this movement that we're living in is to push us as a society as far as we possibly can, so the generation after us isn't having to deal with the same things that our generation had to deal with. I think of my grandmother who was raised in the South, who marched with Dr. King, who can't be in a room with dogs to this day because of her PTSD. Who was sprayed with hoses, who was beat, who also lived to see a Black man elected president. And I recognize that I can drink from any water fountain that I want to. I recognize that I can vote, and there is no laws explicitly blocking me from voting because of the color of my skin. And I recognize that that was because of the sacrifices that she made. And right now, we just got to make sacrifices in a similar vein so the generations after us can be empowered to keep moving us forward. Ms. Robinson is right. We're a young republic, but we're also governed by the oldest constitution in the world, a constitution that was written by nothing but white men for nobody but white men, and was written in a room full of nothing but white men. So, and we still live under that Constitution in America. The systems that were constructed under that Constitution still exist, and all of us are still governed by that. A Constitution that originally did not consider us to be humans. And that's just a fact. And that's the America that we are still living in. And we're young, and that was not so long ago, even though it seems that way. So with all of that being said, I'm still optimistic. We're still grinding, and we're still doing what we can now to make sure the next generations can keep moving us forward.
Daniel, your thoughts?
Sure. So I guess, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation, particularly after work hours. And I guess I'll apologize in advance because I am off the clock in terms of everything I'm about to say. But to the question, I think the answer is obviously no. And I would go even further along and say that I'm not even sure that America has the intention to confront these problems. Because ultimately, I think what's very clear to me is that approximately half the country is fighting this actively and is shown themselves willing to dismantle this country entirely in order to maintain these structures. And the topic of this panel is like, you know, our original sin, which kind of obviously refers to slavery, right? And like a big part of our American history is that white people have always shown a willingness to burn this place to the ground before they will give us anything. And so I think it's important for us to grapple with that because, you know, just as much as we have made progress as African Americans, I do think it's important to question how much progress the rest of America has made and how much more progress or, you know, cost that those people are willing to give up. Because I don't know if we would like that answer if we asked that question.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great answer. And I want to kind of, you know, take that thread and apply it to the way that now people are showing up. So I am in the marketing communications field. And I do mostly multicultural communications, diversity, equity, inclusion communications for different corporations and companies. And so the way that social media is being used as this is how we need to show up. This is as corporations, leadership at corporations are, this, we need to look a certain way externally, but then the work also and the education needs to be happening internally and in the hearts and minds of people to really affect change. And so, you know, I think about when Colin Kaepernick was reprimanded by the NFL for his, you know, his act of taking a knee. And Black people, you know, swore allegiance that we were going to protest and we were going to support. And on our social media pages, you know, folks said certain things. Yet kind of once the football season started back up, it died down. And is it that we are living in a time where our attention span, we don't maybe have the fortitude or the energy to kind of continue you know, boycotts in that way or protests in that way? I pose that question to you, Claude.
Yeah, so I really like this question because I think it speaks to some of the dichotomy of this. So the NFL is 70%, the players are 70% Black. Young people who've worked their entire life to achieve a goal. And it's a goal that most people never get a chance to. And it's a way for them to provide for their families, like we've talked about in the prior panel talked about. There are coaches who are Black, there are administrators, there are marketers, there are a lot of folks there. So when Colin Kaepernick took his stance, I applauded that. The boycotts were another thing, though. Because I wanted to really question that strategy. There's a sacrifice that Cap took for taking a knee, but then at the same time there were others that were trying to push a larger movement. And then what happens to that industry for them to provide for their families? So I have friends on both sides. I have friends who are NFL coaches who are Black, and we had these conversations. And they said, so what do I do then if, you know, the NFL goes away and things like that? How do I provide for my family and everything that I'm doing in my community? And I wonder, you know, the sacrifice, there are a lot of others. Colin Kaepernick is in a long line of others. You know, if we look at Muhammad Ali, if we look at Jackie Robinson, if we look at Maya Moore recently in the WNBA, have all taken stances against social injustice, but we miss a lot. And I think if we're gonna really criticize each other as Black people, we need to look at how come none of us really supported Curt Flood back in 1969 when he took a stance against what was going on, and folks didn't support him. There were retired players back then, and then the community didn't come behind him. But because of his sacrifice, I mean, losing his family, losing his life even, what we have now in free agency is because of that Black man that decided he was going to take a stance to sacrifice for those who benefit now, white and Black. So that's where I stand on the whole Cap thing. If you're going to do something, where's the larger strategy? What's the benefit for Black people after that?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point. And Dawn, I'd like to go to you to kind of, you know, piggyback off that and even tie it to what's going on in Flint. Because so the news cycle can help to create this fervor, this conversation around Black Twitter and allied Twitter, where their pressure is being put on the government, put on people in positions of power to affect change. But then it's the sustainability of it. It's to keep that movement going and to keep it in the forefront, because, you know, news can kind of become this background noise for people sometimes, and they're not always connected to the story. So I'd love to get your perspective there.
Well, I work for mainstream media, commercial television. So these stories are always not even in the rundown, the stories that you're talking about. So it takes people that look like me, people that have this experience to even bring these stories to the forefront. So we may do a story about Colin Kaepernick, or we may do a story about Black Twitter, but it'll be just a blip in, you know, the entire news cycle. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to really assess what we want in this life and what we want from the movement. When I saw the original question about did Black people fail Colin Kaepernick, I think that Black people, or all people, they meet at the intersection of consciousness and activism at different times in their lives. And while one person is taking a knee, another person is showing their activism in a different way. So no one failed Colin Kaepernick if they decided to watch NFL, or, as the gentleman before me, decided to support those players who were still playing, who had to support their families. Well, maybe they didn't take a knee and watch football, but maybe they bought Black, or supported Black businesses, or did something else to advance the movement and to eradicate injustice. So I just think we all have to decide where our place is in this movement, how we're going to advance it, and how we want to level the playing field and also expose these injustices and eradicate them.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, how do we leverage our power as it relates to movements like that, especially as it relates to improving, you know, areas in education, in business ownership, in equity as it relates to just lending and in business overall? You know, how do we, you know, leverage our power in that way, you know, to collectively rally for ourselves?
So it's a good question. And like, I guess to tie it back into the previous conversation and like the framing of the conversation in regards to like, did we fail? I would argue that we haven't, right? And ultimately, I think, you know, one of the most radical things a Black person can do is to survive and to persevere. And ultimately, for Kaepernick and like the rest of the people who had jobs and like had to make hard choices, that's what they did, you know, and they survived and persisted. And I think objectively speaking, what we've seen in that context is that we've pushed the NFL in a pretty dramatic way, right? If we look at, you know, where it's at today, like this week, actually, a classmate of mine was just hired as the first president of a team in the NFL, which 5 years ago, frankly, was unthinkable, right? And like all of this has happened in a very short period of time where, you know, when he first started, you know, just the pure act of kneeling, which is nothing in and of itself, was seen as just like affront to everyone. And now for a person to even question that, like puts them on the outside of that. And so I think all of that is both a testament to, you know, how these things haven't failed, and also to how we ourselves can leverage our collective power. Because like ultimately, you know, our presence is a radical thing that forces people to change, because if we're there, then we are always a counterforce to everything else that everyone is doing against us. And so I think, you know, maintaining that perspective and, you know, establishing that base is like one of the most powerful things that we can do anywhere.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And as I grow in my education around the history of us in this country and globally across the diaspora, we were not meant to survive here in this country. And so the mere fact that we survive and excel in our excellence is just really grounding. So thank you for that. Stevie, did you have something you wanted to share? So
I was just snapping, agreeing with you.
I'll take the snaps. I'll take the snaps. And so with those snaps, I did want to kind of transition in terms of another way of power and collective power is with our vote, right? So my question is related to voter suppression efforts that are underway. Like restricted voter ID laws, cuts to early voting and mass purges of voter rolls. They're nothing new, but in this age of COVID and public health concerns over in-person voting, mail-in voting appears primed to be the latest and greatest way for the occupant to, really have an impact on suppressing the Black and brown votes. So, I'd love to know, Stevie, from your perspective, what should we be doing individually and collectively to push back these attacks now through the national elections this November and beyond?
Yeah, I think the first thing we need to make sure that we do is vote and encourage everyone we know to do the same. We are blessed to live in Chicago and Illinois, where we do have some of the most advanced laws as it relates to voting, automatic voter registration, expanded early voting. This election, we're going to have ballot drop boxes. The hours for early voting is extended. The days for early voting has been extended. And that's because of the hard work that organizers have been doing in this city for a very long time. The elected officials know that if you try to cut any corners as it relates to voting, they're going to hear from organizers. Chicago is the only city that has a jail that's a polling location. And I think when we talk about voter suppression, it is very important from my perspective to talk specifically about the intersection between America's legal system and access to the ballot. Everybody in jail, pre-trial detention, is an eligible voter, but very few of them have access to the ballot because there are not polling machines, except for in Cook County Jail, inside of jail. And the polling machine in the jail at Cook County got there after 2.5 years of round-the-clock advocacy. People in prison, African Americans, Black people, we make up 14% of the population. We make up nearly 60% of the people who are in prison. And America disenfranchises more people than any democracy in the world by way of prison. Those are Black people who are being stripped of their right to vote. And I don't have to explain to anybody the problems that exist in our legal system. I don't have to explain the problems that exist as it relates to mass incarceration. And I don't have to tell everybody who's on this panel or watching it what communities that has targeted. And the fact that the right to vote is automatically stripped from somebody when they are locked up and sent to prison is unjust. And the fact that it's nothing but Black people, for the most part, making up that prison population is the most poignant form of voter suppression that exists today. But unfortunately, when you talk about giving the right to vote to people who are currently in prison serving a felony, it goes in one ear and out the other. It sounds like this radical concept, and it's cast out on the fringes along with reparations and abolishing the police. And I think we are doing our communities a disservice when we are not calling that out as an inequity, as voter suppression, and pushing back against it, in addition to all of those things that you just mentioned.
Dr. Glass, I would love to hear from you when we think about young people and having them understand the importance of voting, that it's not just, if you don't like a candidate or whatever it is, you vote, you register to vote, you serve on a jury. So when you have these challenges around, we're upset about grand jury decisions, well, people think it's cool to opt out of jury duty. Like, how do you, think about that in the context of the next generation and imbuing in them the importance of the right to vote?
Yeah, so like as a fifth grade educator, I've taught fifth grade last school year. And I just feel like one of my responsibilities is really to train up a new core of activists. So we have conversations around the importance of voting, the importance of being a civic participant, you know, participating in things like jury duty, being an activist in your community. In the previous panel, I think it was Angelique, if I'm not, Angelique, who spoke about everyone being a philanthropist. You know, we all have power. And when you have the right people in front of students in the classroom, you have that ability to impact them and to activate them so that they can be mouthpieces when they go home and talk to their parents. And then when it's their turn, they will understand the importance of their responsibility to not only themselves, but their families, their community members. That's something I take very seriously. And I wish that every teacher will take it as seriously, because we have an immense amount of power when we stand in front of the classroom.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Claude, did you have any input on that piece?
Just totally support what Stevie and Dr. Glass are saying. Young people need the opportunity and to see how important it is to get involved in civic engagement. Because you look at the Constitution being written by all white men, oftentimes some of the injustices that are happening are all white juries and Black bodies being put in prison for a lifetime. So we can counter just by our presence some of those injustices.
For sure. Don, I would like to turn it back to you. I mean, right now, for the past couple years, the Fourth Estate has been under assault, and the Fourth Estate does so much hard work in documenting these movements and getting information to the people so they can make correct decisions, right decisions. And you being on the ground in Flint, providing the information from that community to the world so that the world knows what's going on there and its connection, you know, historically to systematic racism, which maybe a couple years ago, people weren't open to that conversation. People didn't want to hear about the history and the background and why it is the way it is. So I'd love for you to kind of talk about the evolution within storytelling as it relates to that.
Well, in Flint in particular, when you talk about the evolution of people opening their eyes to systemic racism, I point right to the water crisis that's been going on in this city since 2014. And the city of Flint, 53% African American, and about 47, 48% of the people live below the poverty line. And in 2014, this community, Flint, Michigan, was poisoned, basically. The city made a decision to switch over its water source to from a larger water system in Detroit, which is about 80 miles to the south of us, to use the Flint River. Well, they didn't put the proper things in place, so the water was tainted. It resulted in Legionnaire's disease. People died. Also, children had high levels of lead in their blood, and mostly African Americans were impacted. And no one cared because the community is largely African American. They don't have much political power because they're in poverty. It's an impoverished community. So you had a government that really didn't care about this environmental injustice that was man-made and thrust upon an entire community. So I would say that people of Flint, Michigan, and not to sound real cliche-ish, but they are woke. And that may have been the watershed moment that sparked their consciousness. And the Michigan Civil Rights Commission even said that systemic racism was at the root of the problem with the water in the city of Flint. So we have been on the front lines at ABC 12 is where I work, front lines with making people aware of what's going on. We've been getting their stories out. We've been letting their voices be heard. And just today, there was an announcement by our Attorney General and the government that there's a $600 million settlement, yet no one is in jail. So, you know, a $600 million settlement, when it's all said and done, you'll get maybe people of the city will get maybe a couple $1,000, maybe $100,000. Their babies have suffered long-term effects from being exposed to lead. Some of them have lost family members to Legionnaire's disease. No one, they were criminally charged. All charges were dropped. Cases weren't picked up again, but there's a $600 million settlement. So the people of Flint have been awakened, if you will, to systemic racism just within the last couple of years, more so than ever before, because they have been a target.
Daniel, did you want to jump in?
Sure, yeah, no, I think like on that point, we've obviously talked about the very important thing of educating the youth and ensuring that the youth have the right information and knowledge to engage in the system. And I, as a person, I've spent most of my life in the system in some form or fashion. I obviously served and I've done a bunch of other things, but I do think it's also important to acknowledge that sometimes the system is insufficient. And it's important, I think, for us as older people to also empower the youth, right? Particularly in moments in which they have the energy and the passion to challenge the system directly. And like, I do think that that's a very important role that we can play, not just in accepting that, but in giving them the space and the opportunity to do so with less consequence, right? Because ultimately, like, we are people of influence and power and connections. And to the extent that we can use that to allow the youth to challenge the system, I think that helps us also win.
No, that's a great point. So when we think about kind of the civil rights movement and now this current civil rights movement, but during the civil rights movement, there were national leaders like Dr. King, Malcolm X, Fannie Lou Hamer, and others who helped to galvanize a movement. And as those lead voices from the original movement, like John Lewis, pass on, and others like Reverend Jesse Jackson, get on in age, is there a succession plan? Should there be a succession plan? Should we follow leaders? You know, or are we looking at the groups like Black Lives Matter, other organizations like Until Freedom with Tamika Mallory, Color of Change? I'd love, you know, anyone to kind of weigh in on that. Daniel.
I guess on that point, right, like, thing I will point out is that you brought up John Lewis, right? And during the March on Washington, he was what, 21 or 22, right? And so, you know, that, if anything, like, I think is a reinforcement of the point I was just making, in that, like, we have to make sure that we are elevating these young voices, because regardless of whether or not we see eye to eye with them, like, these are the people who are going to continue to fight. And ultimately, like, to the question of, is there a plan for succession? I think a large part of that is empowering the young people to be able to have their own voice and to do their own thing, because ultimately it has to happen organically. And I think, like, a lot of times, and I think certainly what has happened since then, is that we talk about secession as if, like, another person's going to give me the power and, you know, bless me to get to a certain place. And that does not work, right? It just does not. And, like, I think the whole construct has to be moved away from, if I'm being honest.
No, that's great. Any other input on that?
And to that point, I just like to say, I think what we've seen with the movement across the country, it has happened organically. Leaders have sprung up organically. They have taken on the mantle. It may not have necessarily been passed on, but they have fallen into these leadership roles. They want their voices heard, and they've taken to the streets. And I think, you know, they've paid attention, even when they didn't know they were paying attention. When you look at some of the young people in the street, at some point they were paying attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
I'd like to jump in really quickly.
Go ahead. Yes, please.
You know, I was thinking about this question, and one of the things that really, like, comes to me, I think a movement that's led by a single leader, if you will, is actually dangerous. You know, I think that the new movement must be led by multiple organizations that were already, some of them that were already named. That's our best, I think, that's our best way of attack, you know, in order to really chip away at these really big boulders, right? So I think the thing that we need most is coordination, you know, that we identify, you know, the 5 things that we're going to attack, and you have all of these people who are moving to attack these 5 things that we've identified. Once those are gravel under our feet, then we move to the next 5 boulders, you know. I think that's the way we should go, because it's very easy to end a movement if you have a single leader and you kill that leader. They've shown us how that works, you know.
Right.
So I think that where we're going now is really invigorating. And, you know, I don't really do YouTube too much, but there's 2 like these twins who are in Gary, Indiana. They're twins, New Trend, and they react to music, right? So they actually have the power, just by reacting to this song by Phil Collins, to catapult a 39-year-old single back to #1 on the charts before WAP came, of course. But that just shows the power of individuals and what we can do when we all are coordinated and we're attacking issues that we confront as a people.
And I would just say that the older generation, we can't get in the way and think that how we did things is the only way and things like that. And I've seen that a lot, where young activists are saying, we watched you and you weren't effective, and we're going to do it our way now. And then the older generation starts to criticize the younger generation, and then our movement stalls because we're not coordinated or strategic, like Dr. Glass is mentioning.
I made this for moments like that.
Boom.
Boom.
Yes, sir.
Boom. Mic drop, pen drop. So I want to remind our audience that please drop your questions in the Q&A. We're going to begin Q&A from the audience in about 10 minutes. So please get those questions in, and we will continue to keep talking. So the power of the hashtag, Dr. Glass, you talked about these 2 twins who I love, like they've been amplified on Twitter and shared on Twitter in terms of the reaction to one of Phil Collins' best pieces of work, Miami Vice. If you old enough, you remember Miami Vice. And so the power of the hashtag in movements, in social justice, in, you know, I mean, Dawn, to the point of a lot of folks in the news business are looking to social media for story content because of the nature of real-time citizen journalists who are sharing a lot of these stories, who are capturing the video of people being murdered. Can you talk a little bit about the impact or the importance of kind of the hashtag and what that means from a social justice standpoint?
Well, the hashtag is very important. And as you mentioned, you know, as journalists today, we are definitely going to social media, finding stories and following hashtags. And I also watch those twins and watch their reviews on old songs. And I just think that we're at a place where social media is so important in so many different aspects of our lives, and especially as journalists. Not only are we getting stories from hashtags, but we're pushing our own hashtags out there, trying to generate buzz ourselves within the newsroom. So to answer your question about the importance of hashtags and as it relates to the social justice movement, if you look at what happened with George Floyd and the uprising around George Floyd, you saw the BLM hashtag everywhere. And just seeing that, it kind of generated an interest, and people would click on that and they would learn something, they would become engaged, they'd become involved in the movement. So I think hashtags are critically important to social activism.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else want to jump in on that point? Okay.
I'll just add that what I've come to realize this go around with the Black Lives Matter movement is how important social media is for civic education. On Only 9 states in the United States of America require full year civics education to be taught in their schools. So a lot of young people don't know how government works, don't know what these systems are that are oppressing them. It's this grandiose concept that nobody can put the nuts and bolts to. But social media is the most effective way for a young person to learn how these systems work. And those hashtags are a great way to kind of build the algorithm that a young person engages with when they log into their social media accounts. And that ultimately empowers them to take the action that they feel that they want to take offline, which is another testament to how powerful social media is in general.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So kind of staying on that point of the thread of education. So we are in a remote learning environment. This pivot to remote learning has been led on by the pandemic and has revealed and exacerbated the higher education opportunity divide. So during these months of enforced remote learning, we've witnessed how advantages and resources can equal advantages in learning. Students who have private places to study, reliable Wi-Fi, and less economically stressed home environments enjoy tangible benefits in their efforts to navigate online courses. If the future of education might include less time spent on campus or in, the four walls of the classroom, then colleges and schools, what is or isn't being done to increase and improve resources that students can rely on for success in these virtual environments? Because a lot of folks are throwing up their hands. They're getting frustrated around, how do I continue to educate my child and give my child the what they need to exist in this world. So I'd love anyone to kind of weigh in on that.
I can start. So remote learning is not it. I can tell you that. I mean, we have to do it for right now, but it is not it. I'm going to do my very best to implement a high quality educational experience for the students whom I serve this fall, but I really wanted to get back into the classroom. That being said, a lot of times we focus on what we don't have, and some of those things are real, lack of resources, lack of space to study, lack of electricity at times. We can get into a whole number of things that students are faced with on a daily basis that we can't control from the schoolhouse. But I do think what's encouraging to me is, and I thought about Bill Duke, and I don't want to date myself because Claude dated himself earlier, talking about 1969, but wasn't even more. But Bill Duke in Minister Society, he said something that I loved. I can't repeat it, but he was questioning Cain, and Cain had messed up, and he said, and I'll ... That's how I feel about the entirety of America. I think that once they've shown us their hand, we've gotten devices in kids' hands when they told us that there was no money. We've gotten Wi-Fi being broadcast for free, and they said there was no money. So now I think that our floor is different. Now we have to demand certain things. We start here. So every child in school in America should have a device in his or her hand moving forward. There is no going back. Everyone who does not have access to internet must have access. There is no going back. And now we have a new floor. Now we just have to build from there. What else will we demand? Instead of talking about what we don't have, what else will we demand? Because back to the philanthropic issue, we have people dropping money in. I don't know who's managing this money. Like the Jordan brand who's giving $100 million. Who's managing this money? Where's it going? Who's cutting checks? Because I have some people who I can give some resources to. So I'm still trying to figure that out. But now we have this groundswell. We need to now demand what is expected of every 21st century learner. They must have these things or else.
Mm-hmm. So before we go, Daniel, did you have a point you wanted to share? Before we go into audience questions, I would like to pose the same question that Darius posed before we got into the question and answer is, name two things that each person listening to this discussion, ally or person of color, can do tomorrow to help dismantle systematic racism and anti-blackness. And I'll start with Dawn.
All right, thank you. Well, one thing, we all can become politically engaged, and that's voting and also putting your dollars behind candidates who, support things that you want to see come to fruition. So I say become politically engaged, vote, and put your money behind the candidate of your choice. I would also say, if you want to talk about allies, moving from a colorblind society to more of a color conscious society, and not being colorblind, but seeing me for me, and knowing that I am African American. Don't look beyond my Blackness. I need you to see my Blackness so that you can appreciate my experience. And when I share with you, you'll be able to understand, even though you've never walked in my shoes, if you can see my color, you'll be able to understand where I'm coming from when I'm communicating with you. So moving away from color blindness to more color conscious and acknowledging people for their color and their experience.
Yes, and somebody's pooch is signifying on that, Dawn. Claude, did you have some?
So, Richard, you say I dated myself, right? So and we talked about the twins in Indiana on some music, right? So I want to hit us with this. I'm talking to Black people right now. We've got to display a deep commitment and love towards each other, our people, our brilliance, who we are, what we've overcome. It's got to be every day, 24 hours a day. And what's funny is that love has to be a liberating force for us. We got to love us, not just symbolically. It's got to be deep. And I was listening to Stokely Carmichael last week, a video, and that was his number one aim to the audience, is we got to start loving each other. We got enough hate outside, and then it's come into who we are now. But we gotta move past it and love each other. Our Black brothers and Black sisters loving each other. And just think about this. Stevie Wonder, when he said love's in need of love today, if you really get into that and listen to it, the message is prophetic of what we need to do as Black people. Frankie Beverly and Mays hit us as well and said, we need love to live. And he said, we better stop messing around with this thing called love. That's what we got to do, y'all, on the real. And for the 80s, I know it's a Michigan folk, when Anita Baker said 365 days of the year up in here, the same old love, a liberating force. That's what I'm standing on. And for the young people, they need it as well. Tupac hit them and said, the hate you give little infants is gonna F everybody. We gotta love our young people as well. So I'm gonna just stay on that and leave you with this one thing. Frederick Douglass in 1895 wrote a love letter of support to Ida B. Wells when she wrote the book, The Red Record. Go back in and look at just the intro. He said to my sister, you are holding it down so much better than I could at this time. Keep marching on. You are doing it. That's the type of love that's there. It's history. We got to bring it back and we got to live it, y'all, on the real.
Yes, Claude, with all that old school. Come on, old school, all the time. Yes. Stevie?
Man, I don't really want to follow that.
So
I want to echo everything Claude said. Love is the healing component, So I want to just validate everything Claude said. I'd add, to our allies, love us. You know, go out of your way to see us, go out of your way to empathize with our experience, prioritize loving Black people and, you know, empathizing with Black people, because we are dealing with generational trauma here in America that people, like, you can't really comprehend, you know? So we need that love and validation and empathy and acknowledgement from our allies. And, you know, we as Black people, we can't assimilate, you know, we can't get caught in this perpetuation of the systems that have oppressed us. Because racism, I think Ms. Powers broke it down in the last panel perfectly, like racism is a sophisticated thing. And it is embedded in these systems that govern our day-to-day lives. And they're not only carried out by white people anymore. There are people of color and there are Black people with power who have gotten that power by assimilating and continuing to oppress their own. So tomorrow, you know, love, 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 whoever you are, and make sure you know, lean into the truth of your culture and lift your fellow Black folks up.
Yeah, that's dope. So I do want to get some questions in since they have come in. So, but if anyone has something burning, like, please, you know, let me know. Daniel.
Yeah, so I guess the thing I would say to the last question is that it's very important to reject the premise, right? And like, I believe it was Toni Morrison who said that the core function of racism is distraction, right? And we talked about on the last like panel, the notion of like the what about this? Like, what about this other community, this other issue, this other problem? And I think it's critically important to, if at all possible, just reject the premise. Because ultimately, like for a lot of these things, it's racism, it's money, and that's what it is. And we can't be afraid to engage that directly for what it is, because we can spend the rest of our lives trying to answer all these other questions that people will have, when the core reality is that it just is what it is.
For sure. So one question from one of our audience members, Sabrina: education is so important, but how do we pursue education when drowning students of color in debt is normalized?
I'll take that. So I work on student loans, I work in student debt, right? And like, you know, I could talk for the next hour or so about just the conditions and like the things that kind of come with it, right? And ultimately, a big part of what's going on is that we are not investing in higher education the way we should be. And I don't have to tell anyone at Chicago State that fact, right? Because ultimately, we all live that and we all feel that, right? And so I think, you know, the answer to that question is that we have to do the best that we can, right? And like support each other, you know, like find other ways to do it. And like, you know, a big part of why I started my company was because ultimately I thought it was important to confront the issue directly, because you know, it's one thing to talk about and it's one thing to advocate. It's like one thing to hope and pray that people will do something better. But the view I've always taken is that if I want to solve it, I have to be a part of that solution, because I can't trust other people to do it for me or for us, frankly. And so I think, you know, a big part of that, like, you know, to, you know, a thing that Dr. Glass said is that when people tell us that like the money doesn't exist, we have to force them to tell us like where it's at and still get what we want. And ultimately, if we like want to be able to solve this question of student debt, we have to solve the question of investment into higher education.
Can I get the boom sign again, Dr. Glass? Because that was a boom. Yes, thank you. So another question from our audience, Anonymous. There seems to be a divide between younger and older Black Americans. What can be done to bring these two generations together for the common good of all?
So I get a chance to, and I consider it an honor to kind of traverse both worlds, the older generation and then young people. And what can be done is to get out of all of what society says. I'm talking to older folks right now. You got your degree, you got some dollars and stuff like that. You got some titles and all that. Yeah. But what are you doing for a generation that's coming forward? And what are you doing for generations that are yet unborn? So for me, you have to, if you've ascended to a certain level of success, you're obligated to do more. It's not just one person. You have to sacrifice for the younger generation, just like somebody sacrificed for you. Somebody say you're rusty. I won't say it, but people sacrificed for you. They fought for you. They believed in you. They cared about you. And you need to do the same thing for the next generation. I know it's something that my grandfather, my grandmother did, working, 3 overnight shifts and stuff like that, so I could have a better life. My mother, the same thing. That's what older people need to do. It ain't on the young people. We need to do better for them. And it ain't hard. You don't need no research. You don't need no white paper. You don't need none of that. Get to work. Call me. And then let's get to work. I got young people we can rock with.
We can rock
with
it.
Piggyback that, I agree. I think that we should invest our time, talent, and resources in the younger generation. And my mom always told me, to whom much is given, much is required. And we are required to invest our time, talent, and resources to bring someone else along the way.
I just want to say, as somebody who works, my nonprofit works with nothing but young people. Our whole role is to engage and empower young people to get involved in the political process. And so speaking from the young perspective, we also got to listen to those who came before us. I appreciate you all saying that it's up to y'all and y'all need to lay down and listen to the young people, but we gotta take steps in the right direction as well. And recognize that we're living in a historic times, but there have been historic times before this one that our elders can inform us about and help guide us through this period of our lives.
That's good stuff.
Yes, I'll snap up for that as I look at this next question. So from Nancy, metrics can be onerous, but they are valuable to inform work and pivot towards effectiveness. What's the right balance in tracking progress for improvement without it being a burden? And anyone can take that.
Is that for education in particular, or?
Yeah.
I would say put the human being before the test score. Anytime you do that, I think you come out on top. One of the things that I always concentrate on as an educator, as a school leader, is make sure that the experience is one that you would want for your own child, for those whom you serve. And if you do that, the experience, I believe, will lead to achievement. We didn't get to a question earlier about cultural competency, but really that's all about building relationships. When you build relationships, you can get to the heart of your students, and when you do, they can accept more from you, they can receive more from you, they'll be motivated and activated, and you'll see a lot of those metrics take shape. One of the issues with students in schools is that most folks don't believe in them. They don't believe that they have the capacity to do well. They come in with preconceived notions, and they miseducate or they undereducate. And those are things we have to root out. I didn't speak on the 2 things I would do if I were to, do 2 things tomorrow. I have to actually do 2 things tomorrow. One is I teach aggressively. I teach like an activist, and I train up activists, and I hold people around me accountable. It's time out for allowing people to stand in front of classrooms full of Black and brown kids and have these preconceived notions about them, and bring all of their biases and their nastiness into the classroom, and we allow them to stay. That can't happen.
Thanks for sharing those 2 things. I think to the point around education, we are all learning and unlearning things. And I think at all levels, right? So to the point earlier around, so many of us don't know our history. So many of us don't know the wonderful people throughout the years who have done so much with so little. And I think social media has helped to shine a light and say and call it out, right? So even if, you know, the civil rights movement as it is portrayed mostly, you know, have male leaders, but there were a lot of Black women who were working in the movement and the, you know, really the engine of keeping that movement going. And so, you know, to the point of educating our next generation and having them have that self-confidence around where they have come from. I think, you know, I'm a member of Gen X. That is something that I cannot say that was prominent in my educational career until I got to college, until I got to pick African American studies as a course, until I got to, you know, be in African American, you know, clubs and things to learn and unlearn what I had been told about myself as a Black woman in America. So I would love if anyone had any, you know, thoughts around kind of like this continuous learning and unlearning.
Well, I think that, and it's just very quick, when you know your history, then you know your worth.
And
And
just go
go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say to Christina's point, the same thing. My mother and I had just recently had a conversation about her fears as a Black woman in Philadelphia and not wanting me to know what was happening from an activist standpoint, because she feared I would be in the movement and would be killed. And to the point of learning, we've got to study with the intention of educating ourselves. Systems, you know, these educational systems are built for schooling and also built for conformity. And our history is much stronger, much more powerful than what's there. There's so many scholars that we should be reading: Dr. Malefi Asante, Asa Hilliard, Wade Nobles, so many that we can read and learn from and be empowered and say, this is me. I ain't even know all this. And that's part of the game, is to keep us from knowing our real power and our real heritage.
Well, and on that point as well, like, I mean, we started this conversation about metrics and like the use of data, and I'm a data person through and through. Like, I have an MBA in finance, like, you know, I live in spreadsheets all day, but the cold reality is that oftentimes data is just an excuse to do something that a person wants to do, right? And ultimately, like, we know as a community what's going on. We have our own knowledge and our own insights and our own stories. And a big part of what happens is that people are using data as a shield to force us to accept something that we know not to be true, right? And like, we have to be very careful about this conversation, right? Because it can be a distraction, to go back to a previous point, from the fact that, like, we know who's suffering or who's hurting or who's not. Like, and like, you know, and like oftentimes, like, you know, to white people, I'll ask them a question in which they're like, oh, I had no idea that this thing was going on. And I simply say, if we went back in time 10 years, and like, you asked a Black person what this was, what would they have told you? And they almost always say that this was a problem, right? And so no data is ever gonna solve that fundamental issue that people don't wanna believe what we tell them.
Yeah, and so with that, boom, that's how we're gonna end part 2 of this panel. Thank you so much, Dr. Glass, Dawn, Claude, Stevie, and Daniel. This was a great conversation, and I'm sure we will continue this. I want to thank everyone, the panelists from our previous panel, Darius, the Chicago State Foundation. Thank everyone for tuning in and continuing to learn and unlearn and take the education, these nuggets forward, whether it's in the work that you do, the next generation of folks who are going to be doing this work to continue to change our world and really shape what we're going to look like as a country. So remember to go vote, register, and get your ballot, get ready, as TD Jake says. And yes, we appreciate you joining us tonight. And thank you all so much for this wonderful conversation that really, I think, touched a lot of people. We had a lot of folks to join us. So again, thank you very much. And I will sign off saying good night to everyone. Thank you.